The strongest academy bully picked a fight. The human girl erased him in seconds. The training hall went silent the moment she walked in, and I knew right then that something terrible was about to happen. My name is Vexter Corin, third-year cadet at the Galactic Defense Academy, and I have spent every single day of my life trying to stay invisible. I am good at it. I have to be. When you are a small gray-skinned Krentari with thin arms and weak bones, invisibility is the only skill that keeps you breathing. So when the human girl walked through those wide doors, and every head in the room turned toward her, I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. Because Drogon was watching, and Drogon never watched anyone unless he had already decided what he was going to do to them. Her name was Lena Whitfield. That is what the registry said. Voluntary exchange cadet from a colony I had never heard of, somewhere on the outer edge of human space. She was small, smaller than me even, and I am the shortest in my year. Her hair was tied back tight against her skull, and her eyes were the color of cold metal. She wore the standard gray cadet uniform, but it did not fit her right. It hung loose at the shoulders, like she had not bothered to ask for the correct size. She carried a single small bag in her left hand. She did not look at anyone. She did not smile. She walked across the hall with the calm, steady steps of someone who had walked into far worse rooms than this one and walked back out alive. I should have looked away. I should have pretended to be busy with my datapad the way I always did when something dangerous was about to start. But I could not stop watching her because something about the way she moved was wrong. Not bad wrong, just wrong in a way I could not name. Other cadets walked. She did not. She glided. Her boots made almost no sound on the polished floor. Her shoulders were loose. Her hands hung open and easy at her sides. She was not tense, the way new transfers always were. She was not nervous. She was not even curious. She was simply present in the way a hunting cat is present in tall grass. I watched her eyes, and that was when I understood. She was looking at the room, not the people. The room. Her eyes flicked to the high windows, the side exits, the support pillars, the gap between the weapon racks and the wall. She was counting things, distances, angles, ways out. In the half-second it took her to cross the hall, she had already learned more about that training room than I had learned in 3 years. Then her eyes found Drogon, and they stopped. Drogon Vask sat on the high bench at the far end of the hall, surrounded by his pack of 4th years. He was a Thronox, which meant he was nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick plates of dark armored skin, and built like the wall of a fortress. His arms were the size of my whole body. His shoulders were so wide he could not pass through a standard doorway without turning sideways. He wore the silver chain of his rank around his neck, and from that chain hung small trophies. A broken fang from a Sylvani cadet who had transferred out last year, a piece of polished crystal from a Visari boy who had not been seen in months, a torn shoulder patch from a Morthak girl who now flinched whenever anyone walked behind her. Drogon was the strongest cadet in the academy. He was also the cruelest, and his father sat on the Coalition War Council, which meant nothing he did was ever truly punished. His pale yellow eyes locked onto Lena, and his thick mouth pulled back into something that was not quite a smile. I had seen that look before. I had seen it on the day he broke a Visari boy so badly that the boy was sent home in a medical pod and never came back. I had seen it on the day he chased a Morthak girl through the lower halls for almost a week before he finally caught her in the laundry room. He was looking at Lena Whitfield the same way he had looked at them, like she was already his. I wanted to warn her, I really did. I opened my mouth, took a small breath, and then closed it again because what was I going to say? Run. She was not the kind of person who ran. I could see that already, so I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. I lowered my eyes. I told myself it was not my problem. I told myself the academy had rules and the instructors would protect her. I told myself a lot of things that I knew were lies. Lena reached the registration desk and handed her datapad to the duty officer, a tired old Krentari named Halvek. He scanned it, blinked, and scanned it again. I saw his thin gray hands pause for just a second. Then he looked up at her, and something passed between them that I did not understand. He gave her a small nod, the kind of nod one soldier gives another, and handed the pad back. She tucked it into her pocket and walked toward the dorm wing without a single backward glance. That was the first strange thing. The duty officer had looked at her file, and he had been afraid. The second strange thing happened that same evening in the dining hall. I was sitting at my usual corner table with my two squadmates, Pell and Tavin, both Krentari like me, both equally good at being invisible. We were eating our protein cubes and pretending not to listen to the loud table where Drogon held court. Lena came in alone, got her tray, and sat at an empty table near the window. She did not look around for friends. She did not seem to want any. She simply began to eat, slowly and carefully, with the kind of quiet focus that most cadets only manage during weapons drills. Drogon stood up. The whole dining hall noticed, even the cadets who were trying very hard not to. He did not walk toward her right away. He took his time. He stretched his huge shoulders. He cracked his thick knuckles. He spoke loudly to his pack about how soft humans were, how their bones snapped like dry twigs, how he had read that they could not even regrow a finger if it was cut off. His pack laughed in all the right places. He was performing. He was warming up. This was what he did before he picked a victim. He liked the room to know what was coming. Then he walked over to her table. He did not sit down. He stood right beside her so that his huge shadow fell across her tray. He picked up her glass of water, looked at it like it was something disgusting, and slowly poured it out onto her food. The water spread across her plate, soaking into her bread, ruining her meal. He set the empty glass down with a soft click. The whole dining hall held its breath. Lena did not look up. She did not flinch. She did not even pause. She finished chewing the small piece of food that was already in her mouth, swallowed, and then looked up at him with those calm, steel-colored eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I was full anyway." Her voice was quiet and even and almost polite. There was no fear in it. There was no anger in it. There was something else, something I did not have a name for, but it made the back of my neck go cold. Drogon's pack stopped laughing. They stopped because Drogon had stopped. He was staring down at her, and his pale yellow eyes were narrow, and the small smile was gone from his mouth. For a moment I thought he was going to do something right there. I thought he was going to grab her by the throat and lift her off the bench the way he had done to others, but he did not. He stood very still, watching her, and then slowly he showed his teeth, not in a smile, in a warning. "I will see you soon," he said. "Yes," she said, "I expect you will." She picked up her ruined tray, carried it to the disposal slot, and walked out of the dining hall without looking back. The doors hissed shut behind her, and only then did the room start to breathe again. Pell leaned across the table and whispered to me, his voice thin and shaky. "Vexter," he said, "she is going to die." I did not answer him, because I had been watching her face when she said, "Yes, I expect you will," and there had been no fear in it, none at all. There had been something almost like welcome. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow bunk in the third-year dorm and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about Lena Whitfield. I thought about the way she had walked across the training hall, counting exits. I thought about the way the duty officer had looked at her file and gone pale. I thought about the way she had sat in the dining hall with Drogon's shadow on her, calm as still water. I thought about the trophies on Drogon's chain, the fang, the crystal, the torn patch. I wondered what piece of her he was already planning to take. But mostly I thought about her eyes when she said the words, "I expect you will." And the more I thought about them, the colder I got, because I began to understand something I did not want to understand. She had not been afraid of him. She had been waiting for him. I did not know yet why that was. I did not know what kind of girl walks into a room full of armed cadets and counts exits before she even sets down her bag. I did not know what kind of girl has eyes that calm when an 8-foot Thronox pours water on her food. I did not know what kind of girl looks at the cruelest creature in the academy and feels nothing but quiet patience. I did not know any of it yet. But I was about to learn. We all were. Over the next few days, I watched Lena Whitfield from the corner of my eye whenever I could. She kept to herself. She did not join any of the practice circles. She did not enter any of the ranking duels, even though every transfer was supposed to. The instructors did not push her. That was strange too. The instructors pushed everyone. But when Lena quietly declined, they simply nodded and moved on, as if her file had told them not to ask twice. She trained alone in the early mornings before anyone else was awake. I know because I started waking up early just to watch her through the high gym window. She did not lift weights. She did not run laps. She did slow, careful movements again and again, the same set every time, her face calm and empty. It looked almost like dancing. It also looked like something else, something I could not name, but it made my hands feel cold whenever I watched it for too long. Drogon watched her too. He did not bother her again right away. He was patient when he wanted to be. He was building up to something. He was letting the whole academy see him circle her, the way a large predator circles smaller prey, so that everyone would know exactly who she belonged to before he finished her. He bumped her in corridors. He kicked her tray once in the dining hall and walked off laughing. He stood close behind her in the queue for the simulation room and breathed onto the back of her neck. She did not react to any of it. Not once. Not even a flinch. Her calm was beginning to feel like a wall, and I could see it was starting to bother him. He was not used to walls. On the 7th day, he made his move. I was in the central training arena with my squad mates, going through formation drills, when the wide doors slid open and Drogon walked in with his entire pack behind him. The drills stopped. Every cadet in the room turned to look. He crossed the arena floor with slow, heavy steps, and he stopped exactly in the middle, under the bright overhead lights, and he turned in a slow circle so that everyone could see him. "Lena Whitfield," he said, and his deep voice rolled across the hall like thunder. "Human cadet, I am calling formal challenge." Behind me, Pell whispered something soft and terrified. Tavin grabbed my arm. The arena doors at the other end opened, and Lena walked in. She had not been there a moment before. I do not know how she knew. Maybe someone had told her. Maybe she had simply been waiting. She walked across the floor with that same quiet glide, and she stopped in front of Drogon, and she had to tilt her head back almost all the way just to look him in the eye. He was nearly 4 feet taller than her. His arms were thicker than her body. He was carrying his ceremonial dueling axes on his back, twin curved blades that hummed with low blue energy. She wore her gray cadet uniform. She had no weapons. Her hands hung loose and open at her sides. By Academy rules, a formal challenge could not be refused. Drogon knew that. Lena knew that too. She did not look surprised. She did not look afraid. She looked up into his pale yellow eyes and she asked him one quiet question. "Practice settings or live blades?" Drogon smiled. It was a wide, cruel smile, and it showed all of his sharp teeth. "Live," he said. Lena nodded once, and then she said something that I will remember for the rest of my life, in a voice so soft and calm that only the cadets nearest to her heard it clearly. "Good," she said. "That will be faster." The arena bell began to ring. The duel was on. And I, Vexter Corrin, 3rd-year cadet, professional invisible coward, found that I could not look away. The bell was still ringing when Drogon moved, and the moment he moved, I knew this duel was already over. I just had it backwards in my head. I thought it was over for her. He came at her like a falling building. 8 feet of armored muscle, both energy axes drawn, both blades humming bright blue, his huge legs covering the distance between them in 2 heavy strides. The arena floor shook under him. His pack was already cheering. Some of the cadets in the watching crowd had turned their heads away, because they did not want to see what was about to happen to the small human girl. Even the instructor on duty, an old Sylvani named Varen, had taken a small step forward, his hand half raised, as if he was thinking about stopping it. He did not stop it. He had been told not to. Drogon's father had made sure of that. I want you to picture what I saw, because the rest of my life has been measured against the next 3 seconds. The first second, Drogon was charging. The second second, his right axe was already swinging down toward her in a wide diagonal arc. the kind of strike that could split a training pillar clean in half. The third second was the one that broke me. Lena did not move backward. That is the part nobody believed afterward, even after they watched the recordings 100 times. Every single creature in that arena, including me, expected her to jump back, to dodge sideways, to run. That is what prey does. That is what every species in the coalition does when something 4 times their size is coming at them with a humming blue axe. She did the opposite. She stepped forward, into him. She moved at the exact moment his arm came down, and she moved into the inside of the swing, where the axe could not reach her. Her left hand came up and touched the inside of his elbow, very lightly, almost like a tap. Her right hand pressed flat against the side of his huge wrist, and then she pivoted on her front foot, and his own swing kept going, but now it was going where she wanted it to go, not where he wanted it to go. The blue blade buried itself into the arena floor a full body length away from her. He had thrown all of his enormous weight behind that swing, expecting it to land in her. There was nothing there to stop it. His own momentum dragged him forward, off balance, his huge shoulder tipping down toward the ground. That was the first second. The second second was the one I still see when I close my eyes. Lena was already beneath his falling shoulder, low and small, and her right hand left his wrist and slid up the inside of his armored arm, finding a thin gap between 2 of the plates near his armpit, a gap most species did not even know existed because Thronok's armor was supposed to be flawless. Her thumb pressed into that gap. There is a nerve cluster there. I learned that later. Every Thronok has it, but nobody on Drogon's homeworld talks about it, because admitting your species has a weak spot is considered a great shame. She had known about it. She had known exactly where to find it on a moving target while ducking under a falling blade. His huge arm went limp. The axe in that hand fell out of his fingers and clattered to the floor. He tried to swing his second axe at her with his other arm, but he was already off balance, already tipping forward, and Lena was already moving again. Her left foot stepped behind his left ankle, very lightly, almost gently. Her right hand came up to his lower jaw. She did not push hard. She simply guided his head a few inches in a direction his huge body did not want to go, and then she let his own falling weight do the rest of the work. That was the second second. The third second was the sound. 8 feet of armored Thronoks hitting the polished arena floor makes a sound that does not really have a name. It was a deep, heavy boom that I felt in my chest. The whole arena shook. The lights overhead trembled. Drogon was on his back and his second axe was still in his hand, but his second axe was no longer humming. It had cut off the moment he hit the ground, the safety circuit in the handle deciding the duel was finished even before the cadets watching had figured it out. His huge chest was rising and falling very fast. His pale yellow eyes were wide and round, and they were locked on the ceiling because his body was not letting him turn his head. He was not hurt. That is the part I want you to understand. He was not bleeding. He was not broken. He was simply held in place by something his body had never been told about, and his mind was finally catching up to the fact that he could not move. Lena was already standing back up. She was not even breathing hard. She brushed her palms against the front of her gray uniform, the way you might brush off a little dust. She looked down at him with those calm, steel-colored eyes. And she did not smile, and she did not gloat. She simply waited, the way a doctor waits beside a patient who has just been given news. The arena clock above the door read 3 seconds. 3. The whole hall was silent. Not a single cadet was cheering. Not one. Drogon's pack at the side of the arena had their mouths open, and their faces had gone the wrong color. The instructor, Varen, had taken his hand down from his belt very slowly, as if he was afraid sudden movements might draw her attention. The recording drones overhead were still floating in their lazy circles, capturing everything. 200 cadets sat in their seats and did not breathe. Lena turned in a small, slow circle, and her eyes went across all of us. They were not angry. They were not proud. They were patient. She lifted her voice just enough to be heard. Anyone else? Nobody answered, nobody could. Then she walked over to where Drogon lay on the floor, and she knelt down beside his huge head. He was looking up at her now, because his eyes could move even if the rest of him could not. There was something in his expression I had never seen on a Thronok's face before. It was not anger. Thronok's faces were always angry. This was something newer, something younger. It was the face of a small creature who has just learned that there is something in the world that is bigger than him, and he is looking right at it. She spoke to him softly. I was sitting in the third row of the watching benches, and most of what she said was too quiet to hear, but I caught some of it. She said his name. She told him the feeling in his arms and legs would come back in about an hour. She told him she had not damaged anything that would not heal. She told him very kindly that next time he picked a target, he should ask himself a question first. The question was, what if she is not actually small? Then she stood up, walked across the arena floor, and left through the same wide door she had come in through. She did not look back. She did not wave. She did not say anything else. The doors hissed shut behind her, and only then did the medical team finally remember that they had a job to do, and they came running into the arena with their floating stretchers and their scanners, and they began to work on Drogon. I sat in my seat and I could not move. I could not move because my whole picture of the world had just been gently set on fire and was burning quietly in front of me. Drogon Vask had been the strongest cadet in this academy for 2.5 years. Drogon Vask was supposed to be the strongest cadet for another 2.5. Drogon Vask had broken stronger creatures than most of us would ever meet. And a small human girl with no weapon had folded him onto the floor in 3 seconds without making a single sound. And then she had knelt beside him and told him gently that he should think more carefully next time. Pell beside me was making a thin whining noise in the back of his throat. Tavin was completely still. I do not think Tavin was breathing. The whole row was the same. The whole arena was the same. Slowly, very slowly, the cadets began to stand up and leave. They did not talk to each other. They walked toward the exits in silence, in pairs and in small groups, and they did not look at the recording drones, and they did not look at Drogon's pack on the side of the arena, who were sitting frozen on their bench like creatures who had just woken up in someone else's life. I saw one 4th year, a Visari boy named Ilden who Drogon had once tormented for an entire term, walk past Drogon's stretcher very slowly, and he did not say anything, but his small purple mouth was trembling just a little bit, and I could not tell if he was about to cry or about to laugh or both. I waited until almost everyone else was gone before I stood up. My legs were shaking. I did not know why. I had not been the one in the duel. I made myself walk down the steps to the arena floor because I needed to see something for myself. I walked over to where Drogon's first axe was still buried in the polished tile. The blue energy had switched off. The tile around it was cracked in a wide spider web pattern. The blade had gone in deep enough that I could see only the upper part of the handle. That swing would have cut anything in this arena in half. Anything. And she had walked into it on purpose because she had known with perfect calm certainty that she could redirect it before it touched her. I stood there beside the buried axe for a long time, and I thought about what kind of training a person needs to be that sure of herself. That night I did something I had never done before in my life. I went looking for someone I was not supposed to talk to. The 3rd-year dorm and the transfer dorm were on different floors, separated by a long, quiet corridor that the instructors called the breezeway. Cadets were not exactly forbidden from crossing it after curfew, but it was strongly suggested that we did not. I crossed it anyway. My boots were soft against the tile. My heart was loud in my ears. The night lights along the wall glowed pale blue. Every shadow looked like Drogon. Every distant footstep sounded like an instructor about to catch me. I kept walking. The transfer dorm was almost empty. Most of the new cadets were still in the medical wing or the lounge, gossiping in shocked whispers about what they had seen. I stopped at the open door of the small common room, and I looked inside, and there she was. Lena was sitting alone at a small round table by the window, with a bowl of something pale and grainy in front of her, and a small thin book open beside the bowl. She was eating with one hand and turning pages with the other. The room was dim. She was the only person in it. She looked up the moment I appeared in the doorway, and her steel-colored eyes met mine, and I forgot every single sentence I had practiced on the way over. "Vexter Corin," she said. "Third year. You sit in the back left of the dining hall. You watch people." I stared at her. I had never spoken to her in my life. I did not know how she knew my name. I did not know how she knew where I sat. "I am sorry," I managed to say. "I should not be here." "You should be wherever you choose to be," she said. "That is the only place anyone should ever be. Sit." She used her foot to push out the chair across from her. I sat. My hands were shaking, and I put them under the table so she would not see. She did not seem to mind. She closed her book very gently and laid her spoon down across the rim of her bowl, and she folded her small hands together and she waited. "I have a question," I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. "I thought you might. How did you do it?" She looked at me for a long moment and her face did not change. It was the same calm, patient face she had worn in the arena, the same face she had worn in the dining hall, the same face she had probably worn the day she boarded the transport here. I was beginning to understand that her face did not change. That was simply what her face was. "It is a long answer," she said, "and it is not really a secret. I am surprised more of you have not asked it before." "Most of us are afraid of you now," I said honestly. She smiled for the first time since I had met her. It was a small, soft smile, and it went away quickly, but it was there. "That," she said, "is the part that bothers me. Tell me, Vexter, how did your people decide who was strong and who was weak before you ever met any of us out here in the stars?" I had to think about that. It was a strange question. I told her that on my homeworld, the ones with the longest claws were the strongest, the ones with the thickest tails, the ones who could break the most stones with a single blow, the ones who could survive the deepest cold or the hottest summer. She nodded slowly, the way a teacher nods when a student has given an almost correct answer. "And what about the ones who could not do any of those things?" "They served," I said. "They worked, they stayed quiet." "And on Earth," she said, "we did not have any of those things. We did not have claws. Our tails fell off long before we ever climbed down out of the trees. We could not break stones with our hands. We could not survive deep cold without help. We could not survive hot summers without water and shade. We were not the fastest or the strongest or the toughest or the largest creatures on our world. Do you know what we were, Vexter?" I shook my head. "We were the ones who would not stop," she said. "That is all. Every other creature on our planet, when something bigger came at it, would either fight for a few seconds and lose or run for a few minutes and hide. We did neither. When something bigger came at us, we looked at it very carefully and we noticed everything about it, and then we walked after it. For hours, for days. We did not run, we walked, we followed. We did not stop. The thing that was hunting us would eventually get tired and we would still be coming. That is how we ate. That is how we lived. Long before we had any weapons at all, that is what we were. We were the creatures that did not stop walking." She picked her spoon back up and took a small bite of the pale, grainy food in her bowl. I watched her chew. "Then we got smart," she said. "And then we built things. And then we fought each other for 10,000 years because that is what intelligent creatures do when they have nothing else to fight. And during those 10,000 years, we tested every single way to take a larger creature off its feet using a smaller one. Every single way. We wrote it down. We trained it. We taught it to our children. Every child on my colony learns the basic shapes of it before they are 9 years old. By the time we are 18, we can do what I did to Drogon in our sleep." I sat very still. I did not know what to say. "But," she said, and now her voice was very gentle, "we do not show it to anyone. The Coalition has been measuring us for 400 cycles. They have been looking at our muscles and our bones and our soft skin and our short lives, and they have been writing reports. The reports all say the same thing. Humans are weak. Humans are no threat. Humans are a curiosity. We have not corrected them, Vexter. We have let them write the reports. Do you know why? No, I said. Because, she said, it is very useful to be underestimated. For a long time it has been useful. But we are starting to think it has been useful for too long. And so some of us are being sent out, very quietly, to a few places in the galaxy where the underestimating has gone a little too far. Places where someone was about to learn the wrong lesson. Drogon was about to learn the wrong lesson. So I came here. My mouth was dry. I wet my lips and I asked the question I knew I should not ask. Are there more of you? Lena Whitfield smiled again. It was the same small smile from before. It was very kind. It was also one of the most frightening things I had ever seen in my life. Yes, Vexter, she said softly, there are a great many more of us. I did not sleep that night either. I lay in my bunk and I stared at the ceiling and I listened to the quiet breathing of Pell and Tavin in their bunks across the room, and I tried to fit what Lena had told me into the shape of the world I thought I had been living in. It did not fit. It was the wrong shape. It kept sliding off the edges of everything I had been taught. I had been told my whole life that the Coalition knew everything important about every member species. I had been told that the Coalition's reports were complete. I had been told that humans were a small, curious newcomer species with too much spirit and not enough strength, charming in the way a small, bright bird is charming, but ultimately not worth taking seriously in matters of war or politics. Every textbook I had ever read had said this. Every instructor I had ever listened to had said this. Every cadet I had ever trained beside had said this. And all of it, every single bit of it, had apparently been the polite cover story of a species that knew exactly how dangerous it was and had chosen, for reasons of its own, to let everyone go on thinking the cover story was the whole story. By morning, the academy was a different place. I do not mean the walls had changed. I do not mean the classes had changed. I mean the way people walked through it had changed. You could see it in the corridors. Cadets did not move the way they had moved a day before. They moved more carefully. They looked over their shoulders more. They watched the human girl when she passed, and they watched each other watching her, and they all knew without having to say it that the old rules were gone. The hierarchy had been a tower made of fear, and Drogon had been the heaviest stone at the top. The tower had not just lost its top stone. The tower had been shown, very politely, that gravity worked differently than anyone had ever imagined. Drogon was in the medical wing for 9 days. The instructors did not announce this. They did not have to. Everyone knew. He was not hurt exactly. The medical staff confirmed that nothing was broken and nothing was bleeding. But he could not get out of bed for the first 3 days, because his body simply would not respond to him properly, and the medical staff had to figure out how to work with what Lena had done to him. And apparently Lena had done it cleanly and harmlessly, but also so precisely, that the standard Thronox treatments could not undo it any faster than time itself would. He came out on the 10th day, and he walked through the academy with his head down. He did not look at anyone. He went to his classes, he did the drills, he did not speak. The trophy chain was gone from his neck. Nobody saw him take it off. It was simply not there one morning. The Sylvani fang, the crystal piece, the torn shoulder patch, all gone. He did not look at Lena, not once. She did not look at him either, but in a different way. He did not look at her because he could not. She did not look at him because she did not need to. The recording of the duel was meant to be classified. The Academy Command tried hard. They issued orders. They threatened punishments. They did not understand what kind of academy they were running anymore. Within 2 days, every cadet in the building had a copy on a hidden partition of their datapad, and they were watching it, slow frame by slow frame, in their bunks at night, and they were sending it to friends in other academies, and those friends were sending it on. And within 5 days, the recording was on every major cadet network in this part of the Coalition. I saw forum threads from species I had never even met, all of them arguing about what they had just watched. Silvani analysts were trying to draw diagrams of her movements. The Vasari psionic monks were insisting that no psionic field had been used and could not understand how the Thronox had been moved without one. The Morthak combat schools were quietly rewriting their textbooks. Even the Thronox themselves, the proud, unbreakable Thronox, were sending official requests to the human delegations asking, in very stiff diplomatic language, what exactly had just happened to one of their high-born sons. The human delegations replied politely. They said it had been a routine training duel between two cadets. They said the human cadet had used standard human conflict resolution techniques. They said they regretted any embarrassment to the Vask family. They did not explain what standard human conflict resolution techniques were. They did not need to. The recording was all the explanation the galaxy required. In the middle of all this, Lena ate cereal. That sounds like a small thing, but it is the thing I remember most clearly from those days. She kept to her quiet schedule. She trained alone in the early mornings. She went to her classes. She ate her meals at the same small table by the window in the dining hall. Nobody bothered her. Nobody dared. The seat across from her was empty for a long time. On the fourth day, I sat in it. I do not know why I was the one. I do not think I was particularly brave. I think it was just that I had already crossed the breezeway once, and the second time was easier. She looked up from her bowl and she smiled her small smile, and she pushed the salt shaker toward me as if she had been waiting for me. We did not say anything for a few minutes. We just ate. After a while she asked me a question, in the same calm, patient voice she had used the first night. "Vexter," she said, "why did you become a cadet?" "My family," I said. "Tell me about them." I told her. I told her my family was small and not important. I told her that the Corin line had served the Krentari for a long time, but always quietly, always in support roles, never in command. I told her my older brother had failed out of this academy in his second year and was now working in a shipping office. I told her my father had been a logistics officer who had retired without any medals. I told her that I had come here because it was expected of me, not because I wanted to fight, and that I had spent every day since I arrived trying not to be noticed by anyone. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I was finished, she said one quiet sentence that has been in my head every day since. "Vexter, you have spent 3 years trying not to be noticed by people who have wasted their lives looking at the wrong things." I did not know what to say to that, so I did not say anything. She let the silence be silence, and then she finished her bowl, and she stood up, and she put one small, light hand on my shoulder for half a second. And she walked out of the dining hall. The next day, she filed paperwork to teach an elective course. This was unheard of. Cadets did not teach courses. Cadets took courses. But Lena was a transfer with strange paperwork and stranger clearances, and apparently her paperwork said she could, and apparently nobody who looked at her paperwork wanted to be the one to tell her no. The course was listed in the catalog under a name that nobody understood. It was called Applied Terran Conflict Theory. It met 3 times a week, in the smallest training room in the academy, the one in the basement that nobody used because the lighting was bad. The first day, 3 cadets showed up. I was one of them. Pell was the second. The third was a Morthak girl named Severin, who had been one of Drogon's earlier targets and who walked everywhere with her shoulders pulled in tight, the way creatures do when they have been hurt and have not stopped expecting to be hurt again. Lena did not seem disappointed by the small number. She greeted us at the door. She had us sit on small mats on the cold floor, and she sat down across from us with her legs crossed neatly under her, and she began to teach. The first thing she taught us was not a movement. The first thing she taught us was a way of looking. She told us to look at her, and she told us to count the number of places on her body where a person of our size could put a hand and use her own balance against her. She said we could take our time. She said there was no wrong answer. I stared at her. I had no idea what she meant. I looked at her arms. I looked at her shoulders. I looked at her ankles. I could not see anything. To me, she was just a person sitting on a mat. After 5 minutes I had counted 0. Pell had counted 0. Severit very quietly had counted 4. Lena turned to Severit with bright, interested eyes. "Show me where," she said gently. Severit showed her. Lena nodded slowly at each one. 3 of the 4 were correct. The 4th was not quite right, but Lena explained why kindly, and Severit listened very carefully, and at the end of that hour Severit was sitting up a little straighter than she had been at the beginning. I have thought about that moment many times since. It was the first moment I ever saw the trick of her teaching. She did not start by making us strong. She did not start by making us fast. She started by teaching us to see. Once we could see, she said, the rest would follow on its own. By the end of the first month, our class had grown to 11 cadets. By the end of the second month, it was 27. The Academy Command was nervous about it but did not stop it, because Lena's paperwork still had clearances on it that they could not officially question. By the end of the third month, the small basement room was no longer big enough, and we had been moved to a real training hall, and we numbered almost 50 cadets, and most of us were not the strongest cadets. Most of us were the quiet ones, the small ones, the ones who had spent years being pushed against walls and ignored at meal tables. Lena's class was full of cadets who looked in the corridors like prey. But in her class, on those mats, with her quiet, patient voice walking us through each shape and each step, we were beginning to look like something else. We were beginning to look like the creatures who do not stop walking. I saw Drogan in the corridor on the day our class moved to the bigger training hall. He was alone. His pack had quietly stopped walking with him sometime in the second week after the duel. They had not abandoned him in any dramatic way. They had simply found other corridors. Drogan walked alone now. His huge shoulders were slightly rolled forward, and his pale yellow eyes did not search the hallway the way they used to, looking for new targets. They looked at the floor. He saw me coming, and for half a second his eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something there. It was not the old anger. It was not even shame exactly. It was something more tired. He looked like a creature who had been told a story all his life, and the story had turned out to be wrong, and now he did not know which other stories were also wrong. He passed me without speaking. I let him pass. That afternoon, Lena did something nobody expected. She walked into the dining hall, she carried her tray across the floor, and she sat down at the table where Drogan was eating alone. She did not ask, she simply sat. Drogan did not look up. He kept eating slowly, mechanically, as if he was not really tasting the food. The whole dining hall went quiet. I was 3 tables away. Pell was beside me. We were both holding our spoons in mid-air. She did not say anything to him for several minutes. She just ate her meal. When she was almost finished, she set her spoon down and said something to him in a voice too quiet for me to hear. Drogan stopped chewing. He sat very still. Then slowly, after a long time, he gave a small nod, just one. She nodded back. She picked up her tray. She left. After that day, Drogan did not look at the floor anymore. He still walked alone. He still did not speak much. But he held his head normally, and his shoulders were no longer rolled forward. And once in the practice hall, I saw him spot a younger cadet being pushed around by a couple of 4th years from another pack, and Drogan walked over very quietly and stood beside the younger cadet and said nothing at all, and the 4th years went pale and walked away. He never told anyone what Lena had said to him. I never asked. Severit asked Lena once, very shyly, and Lena said only that she had told him a thing about his own people that he had been told was a weakness all his life, and that she had explained to him that it was not a weakness at all. She would not say more. The semester was almost over by the time the Coalition Senate began to pay attention. The recording of the duel had been spreading for months by then, and the analysts had finally finished their first round of studies. And somebody important on the Senate floor had finally watched the slow-frame version with their own eyes, and somebody else important had asked a very simple question. The question was, if a single human cadet can do this with no weapons and no training facility, what can a human soldier do? And what can a human warship do? And what is on those colonies of theirs that we have not been allowed to visit? Nobody had a good answer. The reports they had all been reading for 400 cycles, the reports that said humans were weak, the reports written by their own analysts in their own languages, suddenly looked very different. They looked thin. They looked the way a wall looks when you finally see it has only been painted to look like stone. Lena, of course, knew this would happen. She had known from the day she arrived. The duel with Drogon had not been the goal. The duel had been the message. The message had reached the people it was meant to reach, and now those people were going to have to decide what to do with it. And the human delegations, polite and patient as ever, would smile and answer their questions and offer to host inspections. And somewhere on Earth, in some room I would never see, a group of very calm humans was going to nod at each other and quietly mark this part of the long game as complete and turn the page to the next part. I did not understand any of this then, of course. I learned most of it later. At the time, I only knew that I sat in a small training hall 3 afternoons a week, and a small, calm human girl taught me how to see. And that was changing me from the inside out in ways I could not even name yet, but ways I would carry for the rest of my life. The second semester is when everything began to happen quickly, and I have to be careful in the telling, because so much of it ran together that even now, 8 cycles later, I have to slow myself down and put it in order. Lena's class had grown to almost 100 cadets by then, and the instructors had given up pretending they were not watching it. They came to observe. They sat in the back of the training hall on the small visitor benches, and they did not speak, and they took quiet notes on their data pads, and at the end of every class they would file out as quietly as they had come in. Lena did not seem to mind them. She did not change her teaching for them. She did not perform. She simply taught us the way she had always taught us, carefully and patiently, and the instructors watched, and over the weeks I could see something changing in their faces too. They had been instructors for a long time. They had thought they knew what training was. They were learning that they had been training us to use the wrong things. That sounds harsh. I do not mean it harshly. The Coalition's training methods were not bad, they were just incomplete. They had been built around the idea that a soldier's worth was measured in how much force a soldier could put out. Bigger muscles, sharper claws, faster reflexes, stronger weapons. They had taught us, all of us, every species, to measure ourselves against this single yardstick, and they had ranked us all on it, and we had all believed the rankings. Lena was teaching us a different yardstick. She was teaching us that force was a small part of the picture, and that intent and timing and observation and patience were much larger parts, and that if you mastered the larger parts, the smaller part almost did not matter. 100 cadets in a basement training hall does not sound like a revolution. It was a revolution. It just had soft footsteps. First ripple from outside the academy reached us in the 3rd month of the 2nd semester. A coalition senator named Voren Kale, a Sylvani diplomat with a long, thin face and a careful voice, came to visit. Such visits were common at the academy, and most of them were ceremonial. The senators would walk through a few corridors, watch a few drills, take a few recordings for their constituents, and leave. Voren Kale's visit was different. He did not watch any drills. He did not give any speeches. He spent 6 hours sitting in the back of Lena's class, taking notes on a thin paper notebook with an old-fashioned writing stick, and at the end of the class he stood up, walked over to her, bowed very low in the formal Sylvani style, and said 3 sentences in his careful voice. I could not hear them. Lena listened. Then she nodded once, and Voren Kale left, and an hour later a courier arrived at the academy with new clearances for her. And the next day she had access to academy resources she had never had before. She used those resources to expand her class, not to make it bigger, to make it deeper. She added a 2nd tier, an advanced session 3 nights a week in a private hall. The advanced session was small, 12 cadets hand-picked. I was one of them. Pell was one of them. Severit was one of them. There were 2 others I had been close to in the 1st class, and a few I did not know well, and one I had not expected at all. Drogon Vask was the 12th. I will tell you about that because I think it is important. He came to the first advanced session in his standard cadet uniform with no chain around his neck, and he sat down on a mat at the back of the room, and he did not look at any of us. He did not speak. He waited. Lena walked in, looked across all 12 of us, and her eyes paused on him for half a second, and she gave him the same small nod she had given me on the first night I crossed the breezeway. He nodded back. That was the welcome. That was the whole welcome. The class started. Some of the others in the room were uncomfortable at first, Severed especially. She had been one of his earlier targets, and seeing him in that small room with us, his huge shoulders rolled forward, his pale eyes on the floor, brought back things she had not finished putting away. Lena saw it. Of course she saw it. She did not address it directly. She simply paired Severed with me for the first practice exercise, and she paired Drogon with herself, and she walked Drogon through the exercise the same way she walked all of us through it, slowly and patiently and without any extra weight. By the third night he was paired with Pell. By the second week he was paired with Severed. The first time they were paired, Severed's hands were shaking. Drogon was very still. He let her set the pace. He moved at exactly the speed she could handle and not one step faster. I do not know if she ever forgave him. I do not know if forgiveness is even the word. But by the end of that semester, when one of them was missing a class, the other always asked where they had gone, and that was its own kind of language. The advanced class was harder than I had imagined. We were not learning new movements. We were learning the same movements we had learned in the first class, but more deeply. Lena said over and over that you do not learn a thing by adding more things. You learn a thing by going deeper into the few things you already have. By the end of the semester, I could find 4 weak points on a Krentari body, 3 on a Sylvani, 3 on a Morthak, 2 on a Visari, and a single one on a Thronox. Drogon, in the same time, could find 6 on a Thronox body, including one that not even the Thronox medical academies admitted existed. He told Lena about it after a class one night, very quietly, almost ashamed. Lena looked at him for a long moment, and then she said simply, "Good. Now you know where to be careful with each other." He stared at her. I think that was the moment, more than any other moment, when something in him finally settled. He had been a creature shaped by his species' pride for his whole life, and Lena, very gently, was offering him a way to set that shape down. Outside the academy, the world had begun to move. The Vorth hegemony, a cluster of 3 predator species in the outer rim, had been making louder noises for cycles about how the coalition was full of weak member species, and how it was time for stronger species to take the leadership roles. The Vorth had never paid much attention to humans. Humans were not even on their list of species worth thinking about. But the recording of the duel had reached them, the way it had reached everyone, and apparently their analysts had laughed at it. Apparently the Vorth High Command had watched it and dismissed it as a trick, as a scripted display, as some kind of human propaganda piece. They had said publicly that no real human soldier could do what that small girl did, that the recording was a fake, that humans were still the soft pink species the original reports had described, and that the coalition was being foolish to take the recording seriously. They had said this in public. They had said it loudly. And humans, as humans tend to do, had said almost nothing back, and had simply smiled politely, and had quietly continued with whatever it was they were doing in the rooms nobody outside Earth had ever been allowed into. In the 5th month of the 2nd semester, the coalition announced a joint training exercise. It was called Open Sky. The official purpose was diplomatic. Cadets from 12 allied species would be sent to a remote training world for 6 weeks, and they would train together in mixed squads, and at the end of the 6 weeks there would be a friendly tournament, and the winners would receive ceremonial commendations. The unofficial purpose was different, and everyone knew it. The Vorth had been invited, very politely, as observers. The coalition wanted them to watch. The coalition wanted them to see what the new generation of cadets looked like, after the recording of the duel had begun to change how everyone trained. The coalition wanted them to think very carefully before they made any more loud public statements. Open Sky needed cadets. Each academy was asked to send a small group. Our academy commander, an old Sylvani named Helvin Ress, called Lena into his office on a quiet afternoon, and they spoke for almost 2 hours. Nobody knows what they said. The next morning, Lena came to the advanced class and told us that all 12 of us were going, Drogon included. We were going as a single squad. We would represent the academy. She would be coming with us, not as our instructor exactly, but as an attached cadet observer, and we would be expected on the last week to enter the tournament. I remember sitting on my mat that morning and feeling my hands go cold. I had never been off campus in my whole time at the academy. I had certainly never been to a remote training world. I had certainly never been in a tournament with cadets from 12 species, with the Vorth watching from the edges of the field. I looked across the small circle of mats at Pell. He was as pale as I had ever seen him. Severit was breathing in slow, careful patterns. Drogon was sitting perfectly still, and his eyes were fixed on Lena, and there was a calm focus in his face that I had not seen there in any of my time at the academy. He was not afraid. He was ready. Lena saw my face. Of course she saw my face. She walked over to me, knelt down in front of my mat and put one small light hand on my shoulder, the way she had done that first night in the dining hall. "Vexter," she said gently, "you are not the cadet you were 6 months ago. You are not even close to being the cadet you were 6 months ago. Trust the work." I nodded. I did not trust myself, but I trusted her, which turned out to be enough. The transport to the training world took 4 days. It was a small coalition cruiser, painted in the soft white and gray of the diplomatic fleet, and it was filled with cadets from a dozen academies and a dozen species, and the 4 days were quiet and tense in equal measure. I shared a cabin with Pell and Tavin, who had also somehow ended up on the trip, in a different squad. I spent most of the 4 days reading the briefing materials and trying not to throw up. The training world itself was a small dry planet with a single large continent, a wide flat plain ringed by low mountains, and a temporary base built in the center of the plain. The base had 12 dormitory wings, one for each species delegation, and a central training arena, and several smaller training halls, and a row of observer towers along the western edge. The observer towers were where the Vorth would be watching. They had not arrived yet when our transport landed. They would arrive at the start of the final week, just in time for the tournament. The first 5 weeks of training are mostly a blur in my memory. They were exhausting. They were exhilarating. We trained in mixed squads with cadets from species I had only ever read about. We learned each other's strengths. We learned each other's weak spots, although we did not say so out loud, because most of the cadets at Open Sky did not know that you were supposed to look for weak spots in anything other than enemies. Our advanced class did know. We had been taught for months that every body has them, and that the point of knowing them was not to attack but to protect. Lena had drilled this into us until it was no longer a sentence we said. It was a thing we believed. Our squad of 12 drew attention almost from the first day. We did not mean to. We were not loud. We did not show off. But cadets from other squads began to watch us, the way I had once watched Lena, the way Lena had taught us to watch other people. They watched the way we moved together. They watched the way we did not waste motion. They watched the way the smallest member of our squad, a Vasari boy named Renal who barely came up to my chest, could move through a much larger crowd without ever bumping into anyone, his small purple feet finding gaps that should not have been there. They watched the way Severit, who flinched at sudden noises for the first 3 days, stopped flinching by the end of the first week. They watched the way Drogon, the largest of us, moved with the same careful soft footsteps as the smallest, his huge body somehow no longer taking up the whole room. By the 3rd week, other cadets had begun to ask Lena if they could join our practice sessions in the early mornings. By the 4th week, the early morning sessions were no longer ours alone. They were everyone's. Lena did not mind. She greeted each new face with the same calm, patient nod. She did not try to teach the whole new crowd what she had been teaching us for months. She did not have time. She simply taught them the first lesson, the one about looking, and then she let them sit beside us as we did our drills, and she let them ask questions, and she answered every question that was asked. The Vorth observers arrived on the morning of the 6th week. There were 6 of them. I had read about Vorth in the briefing materials, but reading about them and seeing them are different things. They were tall, broader than a Thronox in the chest, with long, heavy arms and skin the color of old bone. They wore armor that looked older than the academy itself, deep gray plates etched with the marks of battles I did not know the names of. They walked in a tight formation through the central arena, their commander at the front, his long pale face set in an expression of deep boredom that was clearly meant to be insulting. They did not greet anyone. They walked straight to their observer tower and they climbed the ramp, and they took their positions on the high platform and they watched. The tournament began that afternoon. The tournament was simple in its rules and complicated in its meaning. 12 squads of 12 cadets each. Each round, 2 squads would meet on the wide arena floor. The arena was a circle of compacted sand, almost 100 meters across, ringed by low stone walls and the high observer towers. Each cadet wore a thin training harness that recorded contact with practice weapons, and each squad was given a set of these weapons, soft staves and padded shields and small light ribbons of cloth, and the goal of each round was for one squad to carry a single small banner across the arena to a marked post on the other side. Any cadet whose harness recorded enough contact was considered out for the round and had to leave the arena. The first squad to plant their banner won the round. 3 rounds won meant the squad advanced. It was supposed to be friendly, diplomatic, a demonstration of the new generation of cadets working together across species lines. Everybody knew the Vorth were not there to enjoy a demonstration. Everybody knew the Vorth had come to be unimpressed in public, to climb back into their ship at the end of the week and report back to their hegemony that the coalition was full of soft children playing soft games, and that the recording of the duel had been a trick, and that the time had come for stronger species to take what they wanted. Everybody knew that the tournament was the last quiet test before something louder. Our squad won our first 3 matches without a great deal of difficulty. I do not say that to brag. I say it because we had been training together for almost a full year by that point, and the cadets we faced had been training together for 5 weeks. The difference was simply too large. We did not need to be cruel about it. We did not push the matches longer than we had to. We carried our banner across the arena cleanly, our movements quiet and economical, and we left the arena when the round was over, and we did not linger. After the 3rd match, the cadets from the other squads no longer made eye contact with us in the dining hall. The Vorth on their high tower had begun to lean forward in their seats. They were no longer wearing the bored expressions they had worn when they arrived. They were watching. On the 5th day, the semi-final, we drew a squad we had been hoping not to draw. They were called Squad Iron Peak. They were 11 Thronox cadets from one of the major Thronox academies, plus a single Sylvani for diplomatic balance, and they were the strongest squad in the tournament by raw measurement. They had won their matches by simply walking across the arena and removing the other squad from the field by force. They were not cruel. They did not need to be. They were just very large and very strong and very practiced, and the rules of the tournament allowed for full contact within the harness limits, which meant the Iron Peak squad could legally pick a smaller cadet up and place that cadet outside the arena boundary, and that cadet would be out. They had done this in every match. They had not lost a single round. The Vorth on their high tower had been watching them with approval. The Vorth understood Squad Iron Peak. Squad Iron Peak made sense to them. Squad Iron Peak was the kind of squad the Vorth themselves would have been 20 cycles ago. We faced them at midday. The sun was high and white above the arena and the sand under our feet was warm. Our squad walked in from the eastern gate. Squad Iron Peak walked in from the west. Their captain, a young Thronox named Vas Karen, stood in the middle of the arena with his huge arms crossed, and he looked across at us, and his pale yellow eyes paused on Drogon because of course they did. Vas Karen had heard about Drogon, Every Thronox cadet had heard about Drogon. The recording of the duel had spread inside Thronox academies in a special way, and it had not made Drogon a hero in his own species. It had made him an embarrassment. Voskaren was looking at Drogon now with the kind of expression a Thronox keeps for failed kin, and Drogon was looking back at him steadily, his head up, his shoulders square. Drogon had not been the cadet Voskaren was thinking of for almost a full cycle now. Voskaren did not know that yet. Lena was not on the arena floor. As an attached observer, she was not eligible to compete. She watched from the edge with the other instructors. Our captain on the floor was Severit, of all people, the small Morthak girl who had once flinched at sudden noises. Lena had picked her 3 weeks ago. Severit had been almost unable to speak for the first day of the role. By the 5th week she had grown into it, the way water grows into a small, careful river. She stood at the front of our squad now, her small dark form steady, and she looked across at Voskaren without flinching, and she lifted one hand in the formal greeting. The bell rang. I will not walk you through the whole match. I will give you the shape of it. Squad Iron Peak came at us in their standard formation, 3 lines of 4, their largest cadets in the front, their staves held high. They expected us to either meet them in a clash of force or to scatter. Squads usually did one or the other. We did neither. Severit had us split into 3 small groups of 4, and each group moved at a slightly different angle, so that the Iron Peak front line had to choose which group to engage first. That choice took them perhaps a half-second. In that half-second, our smallest group, 3 Visari and a Krentari, crossed behind their formation entirely, because they had not expected anyone to bother going around them, and they did not have eyes in the back of their heads. The other 2 groups engaged the Iron Peak front line head-on, but not in the way the Iron Peak cadets were prepared for. We did not try to push them back. We did not try to clash staves with them. We let their strikes come, and we redirected their strikes the way Lena had taught us to redirect Drogon's axe a year ago, using their own enormous weight against their own enormous balance. The Iron Peak cadets were strong. They were not used to having their strength used against them. Within the first minute of the round, 4 of their front line were on the sand, not hurt, simply put down by their own swings going in directions they had not chosen. The harnesses recorded the contact. The 4 cadets, looking deeply confused, walked off the arena. Voskaren stood very still in the middle of his collapsing formation. He could see what was happening, but he could not yet believe what he was seeing. The smaller group of ours that had circled behind reached the marker post, and Drogon, who was in that group, picked up our banner and planted it cleanly in the post, and the bell rang to mark the end of the round, and we had won. The whole thing had taken less than 3 minutes. The arena was completely silent. The Vorth on their high tower were not leaning forward anymore. They were sitting bolt upright. Voskaren walked over to Severit and bowed to her, formally, in the way a Thronox warrior bows to another warrior whose skill has been demonstrated, and he said in his deep voice that he wished to know the name of her teacher. Severit pointed across the arena, to where Lena was standing quietly on the edge with the instructors, and Voskaren turned, and he looked at the small human girl in the standard cadet uniform, and after a long moment he bowed to her too. The tournament final was the following morning. It was scheduled for full daylight. The Vorth had requested it. They had spoken briefly to the senior coalition observers, asking that the final be held with maximum visibility. They wanted to see clearly. The other squad in the final was a mixed Sylvani and Morthak squad, well-trained, careful. They would have been a good final. They would have given us a worthy match. But that match never happened, because just before the final began, the Vorth commander climbed down from his observer tower, walked across the arena floor in his old gray armor, and stood at the center of the sand, and spoke a single sentence so loudly that every cadet in the base could hear it. He said that his hegemony challenged our squad before the match to a single demonstration, not a tournament round, a single open contest on the same arena with the same harnesses, his 6 observers against our 12. He said that he wanted his commanders back home to see, with their own eyes, whether the recording of the human girl had been a trick. He said that this was the only way to settle the question. He said it with the absolute confidence of a creature who had never once in his life been wrong about a fight before it started. The Coalition's senior observers did not want to allow it. You could see it in their faces. They had not authorized it. It was not on the schedule. It was not what open sky was for. They began to confer quickly with each other, and one of them stepped forward to politely refuse. But before the senior observer could speak, Lena, on the edge of the arena, stepped onto the sand. She walked in her quiet, calm way until she was standing beside our squad. She looked at the senior observers. She looked at the Vorth commander. She did not look at us. "With respect," she said in her clear, soft voice, "I think we should accept." The senior observers looked at her. The Vorth commander looked at her. Lena turned to the rest of our squad, to the 12 of us standing in our worn training harnesses on the sand. "You decide," she said. "I do not lead this squad. Severit leads this squad. And every one of you has a vote. We accept only if all 12 of you say yes." I looked at Severit. Severit looked at each of us in turn. One by one, every cadet in our squad nodded. Pell nodded. Renal the Vasari nodded. Drogon nodded, and his nod was steady. I nodded last. My hands were cold. My heart was loud, but I nodded. Severit turned back to the Vorth commander, and she bowed formally in the small, careful Morthak style. "We accept," she said. The Vorth commander smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a creature who already knew the ending of the story he was about to read. He turned and he walked back to his 5 companions, and they descended from their tower together, and they took up their positions on the western half of the arena. They did not bother to put on harnesses. The Coalition observers offered them the harnesses. The Vorth refused. They said the harnesses were for cadets. They said they would simply step off the arena themselves voluntarily when they were satisfied. The Coalition observers were not happy. They argued for several minutes. Finally, a compromise was reached. The Vorth would wear simple contact bands on their wrists, which would record strikes but would not eject them. They would step off when they had been struck cleanly 3 times each. We would wear our normal harnesses. The match would end when either every Vorth had stepped off, or our entire squad had been eliminated. Lena walked back to the edge of the arena. She did not give us a speech. She did not give us instructions. She turned and she sat down on the low stone wall and she watched. Severit took a slow breath and she turned to face us. Her small dark eyes were steady. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "They are 6, she said. "We are 12. Do not be afraid of their size. We have trained against larger. Drogon is larger than any of them. We have trained against him for a year and we are still standing. Their armor is old. There are gaps. You all know how to find gaps. Do not strike to harm. They are not our enemies. They are our guests. We are simply going to show them very politely what they came here to see." She paused. She looked across all of us, one by one, and her eyes rested last on Drogon. He gave her one short, steady nod. "Go gently," Severit said, "and do not stop walking." The bell rang. "I will tell you what I saw because I was there, and because I want you to know it from a witness and not from a recording. I will not exaggerate it. I will not make it bigger than it was. I will simply tell it." The 6 Vorth came at us in a loose wedge, their commander at the point. They did not run. They walked with the slow, heavy confidence of creatures who had never had to hurry in their lives. Their fists were closed but not raised. They were not even taking us seriously. We met them with no fixed formation. We had broken into pairs and threes. We moved around them, not into them. Renal, the smallest of us, was the first to make contact. He slipped between the commander and the Vorth on his right, low and quick, and his small purple hand brushed across the commander's wrist contact band, and the band beeped a soft, single tone. The commander did not even seem to notice. He swung his huge arm in a slow, lazy backhand toward where Renal had been. Renal was no longer there. Renal was already 3 steps past, and now his second contact with the commander's band came from behind, Another soft beep, and the commander had now been recorded twice. It started like that and it stayed like that for almost the whole match. We did not strike them with force. We touched them again and again in the small places between their old armor plates, in the gaps at the wrist and the elbow and the side of the neck, the gaps Lena had taught us to find on every species we had ever studied. The Vorth had not expected this kind of contact. They had expected to be hit. They had expected to absorb hits and to throw cadets across the arena. They did not understand what was happening. Their commander turned in the center of the arena, slow and heavy, looking for us, and we were never quite where he looked. His band was beeping steadily now. He had been recorded 6 times, then 9, then 12. By the time the third Vorth was eliminated, the commander was breathing hard. He was not used to breathing hard. His pale face had gone almost gray. He had still not landed a single strike. 2 of our squad had been clipped in the shoulder by stray swings, but the harnesses had recorded only minor contact and they had stayed on the arena. The other 10 of us were still moving, calm and careful, our footsteps soft against the sand, our breathing steady. We were the creatures who do not stop walking. We had been told this for a year. We were proving it now. The commander finally stopped moving in the center of the arena. He stood very still, and his huge chest rose and fell, and he looked across at the 12 of us, and his pale yellow eyes were no longer the eyes of a creature who had never been wrong about a fight before. They were the eyes of a creature who had just learned a very large new thing about the universe, and who was going to have to carry that thing back home. He raised one heavy hand, palm open, the formal Vorth gesture for surrender. Nobody on our squad cheered. Nobody on the High Observer Tower cheered. The Coalition senior observers were on their feet. Lena, on the low stone wall, had not moved. She was simply watching, with her calm, steady eyes, the way a teacher watches a class take a final test it has prepared for all year. The Vorth commander walked across the arena, alone, slow and heavy in his old gray armor, until he stood in front of Severit. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. He spoke a single sentence in his deep voice, loud enough for the whole arena to hear. "We will not be coming back," he said. Severit bowed to him, the small, careful Morthak bow. He bowed back, deeper than he had to, and then he turned, and he walked his 6 companions off the arena, and they boarded their ship that same afternoon and they left. The Vorth hegemony did not make any more loud public statements about the coalition for a long time after that day. They went very quiet. Some of their politicians, the loudest ones, began to lose their seats. Their academies began to ask, very politely, for copies of human training materials. The materials they were sent were carefully chosen. The deepest parts were not in them. They were not meant to be. Lena told me much later that the deepest parts were never going to be in any materials at all, because the deepest parts were not techniques. The deepest parts were the way of seeing and the way of walking and the patience and the refusal to stop. Those things could not be written down. Those things could only be taught, person to person, in small, quiet rooms, by teachers who had been taught by their teachers, all the way back to a small, dry world where the first humans had walked after their food until their food gave up. I am writing this from the bridge of the cruiser Whitfield, named after my old teacher, on the way to the outer rim where I will be the senior cadet instructor at a new joint academy. I am 27 cycles old now. My students are 17 cadets from 12 species, and not one of them is human, and every one of them has been chosen because they were once the small one in the corner, the one who tried not to be noticed, the one who had given up on being seen. I will teach them what Lena taught me. I will teach them to look. I will teach them to walk. I will teach them that strength is a small word for a large idea, and that the largest part of that idea has nothing to do with size or weapons or claws. Lena retired from active duty 3 cycles ago. She lives now on a small green colony far from any major shipping lane, with a partner whose name I will not write down here, and she keeps a garden, and she trains a class of 11 local children every morning, the same way she trained 11 of us in a basement training hall once, a long time ago. I visit her every cycle on the academy break. We sit in her garden and we drink hot water with herbs in it, and we talk about everything and nothing, the way old friends do. She always asks about Drogon. He is the senior officer aboard the diplomatic cruiser Patient Sky now, and he has done more good in his cycles of service than most Thronox officers do in a long lifetime. And I believe he became that officer because Lena sat down across from him in a dining hall once and said something quiet, and he listened. The galaxy spent a very long time measuring its species against the wrong yardstick. It looked at claws and teeth and the size of fists. It made tall reports and longer rankings. It put Earth near the bottom of those rankings, and Earth let it, because Earth had its own quiet plans and was not in a hurry. And then one cycle, a small girl in a gray uniform walked into a training hall on a Coalition Academy world, counted exits with eyes the color of cold metal, sat down in a dining hall with a calm, patient face, and waited for the strongest cadet in the building to pick a fight with her. He did. She finished it in 3 seconds, and she did it gently, and she did it without taking anything from him that he needed to keep. And after that the rankings began to change slowly, and the reports were rewritten slowly, and the species that had spent 10,000 years quietly walking after things that did not stop running were finally seen for what they had always been. We were never the strongest in any room we had ever entered. We were simply, every one of us, including the smallest among us, the ones who would not stop walking, and in a galaxy that had built its hierarchy out of fists and claws, that turned out to be the only strength that mattered. I have been Vexter Corin, 3rd-year cadet, professional invisible coward a long time ago. I am someone else now. So are we all. The doors to the bridge are opening. My students are filing in for their morning lesson. I can hear their soft footsteps on the deck behind me. They are learning already without being told. I will turn now, and I will greet them, and I will begin. The galaxy is very large. There is much more walking to do.